Hi guys, welcome to Sosin classes. This is Hima Hegde presenting before you the current and contemporary affairs in anthropology. The first topic for the day is children and anthropology. The anthropology of childhood is a relatively new field for anthropological study which emerged in Britain during the 1970s and contrasts with the earlier culture and personality studies conducted by American anthropologists such as Margaret Mead during the 1940s and 50s. These studies were primarily interested in exploring how processes of socialization and cultural transmission take place during childhood. However, in these accounts, little attention was given to the children's own active role in these socializing processes. The focus was instead on the mechanisms through which the culture passed between the generations. Contemporary work on childhood, by contrast, sees children as social actors in their own right and seeks to document their perspectives on and participation in the social world. This approach acknowledges that children experience different kinds of childhood in different societies and questions whether childhood should be seen as cultural universal. Contemporary anthropological studies of childhood also recognize that although children may not occupy central social, political, and economic roles in society, it is important to see that they can and do make an active contribution. This may take place through, for example, their membership of peer groups and of families and their participation in leisure, work, and schooling. An anthropology of childhood seeks to understand the different social worlds of children and how children learn about the adult social world to which they eventually will belong. The Culture and Personality School of American Cultural Anthropology, with which Mead is associated, was interested in how culturally specific child rearing practices shape the emotions and personality of children as cultural beings. Indeed, Mead herself saw the different peoples of the world as a kind of laboratory of child development in which each culture presented a different set of experimental conditions for the treatment of children. In a short film, Bathing Babies in Three Cultures, made with Gregory Bateston, Mead showed how something as apparently straightforward as bathing a baby could be approached very differently, the method corresponding not only to the environment but also to a culturally specific training of the young child's emotions. Cora Dubois, another member of the school, conducted fieldwork in the late 1930s on the Indonesian island of Alor, describing the impact of caregiving and disciplinary techniques. Relatively unusually for her time, she also analyzed children's drawings and conducted the psychological tests. Dubois argued that childhood experiences were central to the development of model personality or common personality type of a particular culture. However, she also acknowledged the significance of innate individual differences in shaping adult character. In conclusion, anthropological research has shown how childhood varies across space and time, how it involves different expectations of young people of different ages, how it intersects with other variables such as social class, and how it shapes children's everyday experiences. Although many earlier anthropological studies were interested in childhood for what it revealed about the cultural formation of personality or the socialization of young people into social roles, later work has moved away from a narrow focus on children as simply adults in making. Ethnographies that take children's own knowledge seriously have explored children's own cultural perspectives and their ability to creatively respond to linguistic, social, and economic change. Even as arguments are made about the disappearance of childhood in context of contemporary formal schooling, economic exploitation, or armed conflict, children often demonstrate considerable resilience. Secondly, we will be visiting a tribe called as the Badagas. The Badagas are an ethno-linguistic community living in the Nilgiri district in Tamil Nadu, India. Throughout the district, the Badagas live in nearly 400 villages called the Hattis. The Hattis. The Badagas speak a language called Badaga. The name Badaga, meaning northerner, comes from Old Kannada Padagana, meaning north. According to the Badaga oral tradition, their ancestors were presumed to be Vokkaligas who migrated from the plains of Mysore to avoid Muslim persecution. According to American anthropologist Paul Hawkins, whose research on the Badagas spans nearly 6 decades, the Badaga tribe, despite its sketchy history, is as indigenous to the Nilgiris as are English to Britain. They claim to come from 7 siblings living in the Talamalai Hills. In the Talamalai Hills. As we discussed earlier, they live in 400 villages called Hattis, and Tundu and Sile forms an integral part of the attire of the Badaga women. It is basically a white piece of cloth. Badagas marry within their community and follow their own marriage traditions. Their important festival is called Devva Habba. Devva Habba provides significant insights into the origin of Badagas. They have certain rules and regulations to be followed in implementing their certain cultural rituals from birth of a child and follows through functions like puberty, marriage, naming ceremony, 7th month pregnancy, housewarming, and finally in death. The Badaga language is spoken by the Badaga community and the language is closely related to Kannada. Several Badaga have become officials in various parts of the Indian government. There is a long standing demand to restore the status of the Badagas in the list of scheduled tribes under the Indian Constitution. The Badagas were on the tribes list during the British Raj as per the 1931 census. After independence, Badagas were on scheduled tribe list during 1951 census but were later removed. Lastly, let's talk about the Parkinson's disease. We'll also look into a gene that has a possibility of curing the same. Parkinson's disease is a brain disorder that leads to shaking, stiffness, and difficulty with walking, balance, and coordination. The laboratory of Emi Nagoshi, professor in the Department of Genetics and Evolution in the Faculty of Science, uses the fruit fly or the Drosophila to study the mechanisms of dopaminergic neuron degeneration. Her group is particularly interested in FER2 gene, whose human homologue encodes a protein that controls expression of many other genes whose mutation might lead to Parkinson's disease via mechanisms that are not very well understood. Parkinson's symptoms usually begin gradually and get worse over time. As the disease progresses, people may have difficulty walking and talking. They may also have mental and behavioral changes, sleep problems, depression, memory difficulties, and fatigue. Both men and women have Parkinson's disease. However, the disease affects about 50% more men than women. One clear risk factor for Parkinson's is age. Although most people with Parkinson's first develop the disease at about the age 60, about 5 to 10% of people with Parkinson's have early onset disease which begins before the age of 50. Early onset forms of Parkinson's are often but not always inherited, and some forms have been linked to specific gene mutations. Parkinson's disease occurs when nerve cells in the basal ganglia, an area of the brain that controls movement, become impaired and/or die. Normally, these nerve cells or neurons produce an important brain chemical known as dopamine. When the neurons die or become impaired, they produce less dopamine, which causes the movement of problems of Parkinson's. Scientists still don't know what causes the cells that produce dopamine to die. Although some cases of Parkinson's appear to be hereditary and a few can be traced to specific genetic mutations, in most cases the disease randomly occurs and does not seem to run in families. Many researchers now believe that Parkinson's disease results from a combination of genetic factors and environmental factors such as exposure to toxins. For people with Parkinson's who do not respond well to medications, deep brain stimulation or DBS may be appropriate. DBS is a surgical procedure that surgically implants electrodes into the part of the brain and connects them to a small electric device implanted to the chest. The device and the electrodes painlessly stimulate the brain in a way that helps stop many of the movement related symptoms of Parkinson's, such as the tremor, slowness of movement, and rigidity. Other therapies may be used to help with the Parkinson's disease symptoms, like physical, occupational, and speech therapies, which help with gait and voice disorders, tremors and rigidity, and decline in mental functions. Other supportive therapies include healthy diet and exercise to strengthen muscles and improve the balance. So that is it for today. Hope you found it informative. Thank you.